Great. Well, tonight we have such a delight. I can't tell you. Pam and I have had a sneak preview and we were absolutely gobsmacked at the end. Tim's work is so beautiful, and it's really interesting because before he studied glass and ceramics, he actually studied architecture, and you can really see that kind of structural sort of influence in his work. But it's very much about light and about how it the way it plays with glass and the color. Wow, you wait until you see these colors. It is extraordinary. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Tim, because I know we're all going to be absolutely blown away by your talk.
Thank you, Sue. Blown away, no pun.
Unintentional.
Well, yeah, as Sue said, I originally was studying architecture after my art foundation, but I missed sort of more pure art form that I was doing sort of art on the art foundation, sort of sculpture and painting, and realised that architecture was much more of an inspiration than actually the practice that I wanted to work in. And there was I was studying in Brighton. There was a glass sculpture exhibition as a cast glass. I think it was predominantly Czech glass exhibition in Brighton when I was studying, and saw it. And as soon as I saw these large polished glass sculptures, that was it. I knew that was the medium I wanted to try and work in, and just researched where that was possible and how you would even go about doing that. And yeah, I found a course in High Wycombe at Buxton University, and I transferred over straight away. It was just that really. Haven't sort of stopped in glass since. So the image you see is from my degree show. I graduated in 2011, and this was a hung, cut and polished piece of glass, which you can see it's sort of suspended. So it rotated very slowly. It was in a darkened space with just a spotlight on it. So the shadows behind you, behind the piece, would move in and out of the glass, and sort of you've got a circle of orange that would come just for a second perfectly, and then break apart again. You get these different ellipses. So I was really into sort of the idea of kinetic work when I was in university, and this particular piece had been a springboard for the work that I went on to do. So when I graduated, I did a show called New Designers, which is in Angel Islington, which people do once they've graduated with their degree work. And I was really lucky to meet Peter Layton at this show. He really liked my work and asked me to come do some work experience. And I've been a resident artist there ever since. So it was a very fortuitous meeting. And this sort of, I really like sort of chance encounters and ideas of chaos. It was the book that I found in Brighton Architecture Library, which after I saw the glass exhibition there and tried to research how to do glass, was actually Peter Layton glass art. So it's all quite funny, sort of full circle. The piece you're seeing at the moment is Echoes of Light. It's a range of different colours. And it was a sort of development from that piece you saw at uni of sort of working with circles and layered colours. And this has been my sort of most successful range, and sort of this was the first thing I started doing at London Glassblowing that got sort of prominence and recognition. And yeah, so it's a blown form, very thick. You can see like a light blue ring in the middle, and then a purple ring around it. So the purple is an illusion. The real colours within the piece are just blue, pink, and yellow. But because they're transparent and they're overlaid, it then creates these extra echo colours, as I call them. So the pink and the yellow will create the orange, and the yellow and the blues create greens, and then the pink and the blue make the purple. So it's a lot of sort of illusion and trickery, and I like to try and make people sort of guess what it is that they're actually seeing, and hopefully sort of give a bit more investigation to the piece. So the range has got a few different colorways, essentially working with primary colors to make secondary colors. So in this piece, the purple is the illusion, It's created from pink and blue. And in this piece, the green is the illusion. It's just a yellow and blue. And the thing with glass for me is the vibrancy of the color. I predominantly work with transparent colors because I just want to utilize the way that light passes through the glass. And it just sort of, light excites glass. It gives it a glow and it gives it an energy, unlike any other material. And the fact that you could sort of create, I was trying to create colors that you couldn't buy really. That was sort of the idea of, because I did sort of painting my art school time, the idea of sort of mixing colors is sort of it's just sort of the main idea of how I was trying to work. So these early pieces were just trying to exploit that sort of illusionary fact of creating colors that aren't actually there. And because so it's a blown piece which I've cut open, which some videos to show the process a bit more depth, but you then create sort of polished surface, which is like a lens, so it then absorbs even more light and projects it out into its surroundings. So this, I think of them sort of vessels that hold light, essentially. This is a video at Devereux and Husky's Glassworks, where I make a lot of my pieces. So this is picking up what we call a cup. So it's a way of creating those layers of color. It's a way of suspending those layers of color. So you can see that you've got a ring of sort of green color and then a ring of blue, and then what also looks like a ring of green, but it's actually clear. So in between them is clear glass. So this is what a cup. This is a yellow cup, then pink cup. So you can then just, it's almost like Russian dolls. You can just sort of layer them up. Every time you take a gather of clear glass, you can essentially do something to that layer. So that's mostly how I will build up my pieces, is with these cup casings. And you've got to have it perfectly smooth and the right size so you don't trap any bubbles. Yeah, that's Mr. James Devereux doing that one. He's rather good at that. This is the cutting picture of me cutting one of these pieces. So that's the piece, that's an echo before it's cut. So it's a sort of full disc before I've sliced it open. This particular one is massive. It's for a very special commission to go on to a luxury yacht, and they wanted them to be, as a big yacht, so they wanted big pieces. And this really pushed, this was the heaviest piece they've made in their studio, and their studio is renowned for making heavy work. This piece was over 20 kilo, over 25 kilo, I think. It was, if you're working with hot glass at that scale, it's, yeah, it's lively. and cutting them, this was the first one I cut at that size. It was quite a challenge, but once you sort of work on a larger scale and then you go back to what is maybe your usual scale, and it does sort of, it's really helped to go through that process. It can make things easier. This piece is called Light Vortex, so sort of a variation on the echo with this extra cut through it. This piece, it was in the International Glass Prize in Lommel in Belgium in 2014. So this sort of series, like I said, it led to sort of a bit of a rise in prominence for me, and sort of got me into various different exhibitions. The Echoes of Light before was in the Coburg Prize in 2013, I think it was. Sort of the first major sort of glass exhibition I got into outside of London, and yeah, it was quite an eye-opener to sort of be amongst all these different artists and crazy work. So this is a video of how I polished that cutout. So I created my own V-shaped court wheel. So I was able to then polish within that gap, and you can see how fine the tip is. So I've got to be really careful not to catch that. And people often ask me sort of how my pieces stand. So I will grind a base for them to stand. I sort of find where the weight is, the natural weight through the piece. And then I'll grind a flat base on that so it will be freestanding. And as long as the weight distribution is correct, they're reasonably stable. You might sort of look little precarious at times. But again, I like that it has that sort of energy to it of how it's sort of standing. Better idea of the form with this 360 revolution, and you sort of see how the light and the color really moves within the piece. Once you get that movement, you sort of start to see a lot of that illusion. This piece is called Parallax. So a lot of my work sort of based on the main primary shapes of circles, squares, and triangles. This is sort of my more square pieces. It's a parallelogram in shape. There's a air bubble that runs through the middle, and then the rest is thick glass. But again, it's got these layers of color, but rather than a pure color, it's individual canes. So the pink is going in one direction, and then the yellow goes in the opposite direction. So you get a crisscross technique, which is a sort of take on a retticello, which is a Venetian technique. What I really liked was the pure color. You could see different illusions happening, but with the lines, it was really clear that these are optical effects when a line suddenly moves in the whole opposite direction, or the way it bends within the glass. So that was sort of the next step in these evolution of pieces. And these are the triangular ones, again, with this sort of retticello cane technique through the middle. I did this for quite a sort of period of time, sort of working with these canes. It's a whole extra step in the process. The first thing you have to do is make the cane, then you'd have to create the cane cup, then pick up the cane cups to create the piece, and then cut and cold work the piece. So there's a lot of different processes that go through it. Cane work can be very unforgiving. A lot of these pieces, I was working with Elliot Walker, who was the winner of Blown Away 2. Both of our sort of foreign sort of cane working. So that was really fun to work with him on that. And with this one, as sort of detail, I put a texture on the back of the glass, which is creating this. So this is the reflection of the cane work. And for me, I always liked the way sort of light played on water, and I thought glass did a similar effect. So by creating a sort of dappled texture on the back of the glass, the canes, instead of reflecting perfectly in the back, you get this lovely. In Japan, I went to Japan in 2014, and there was like lots of neon on water in some of the cities, so especially Osaka had a lot of rivers running through it. And this is something that I was just trying to interpret in the glass. So very often I would do something different to the surface of the glass to create an extra illusion once I've cold worked the face. So sort of what you see beneath. Same in that I just love when you go in the sea, you go snorkeling, dive down, sort of roll on your back and look back at the surface of the water and the way the sort of light played upon it. So again, it was sort of standpoint for these pieces. This is a video of me working with James Devereux at studio, Devereux and Husky Glassworks, which is in Wiltshire. So this is taking a final gather out of the furnace. I've been working with James there since about 2015. He's an exceptionally skilled glassmaker, and their studio specialised to make extra large pieces. So for my first appearance at Collect in 2015, I went there to make some larger pieces, especially for that show. And the response to the larger scale was such that we've continued at that larger scale ever since. And there's so many benefits of going there. A, the experience of James, but B, these larger pieces have a much longer annealing time. So the thicker the piece of glass, the longer you have to cool it down. So I can do that at James with a dedicated kiln space. But yeah, I've been working with him for nearly 7 years, and we've got a really good working relationship there. Other working relationships, this is Bruno Romanelli on the left, and he's taking a mold of my hand in alginate. So this was Bruno's masterclass in Northlands in Scotland, and I was his technical assistant for this class, having been his assistant for about 2 years from 2017. Bruno's great, really fun guy. I think Petra is on this chat. She's one of the students on this course. and they made some really wonderful work. But more just to say, yeah. So while I was assisting Bruno in his studio, obviously Bruno is a master of cast glass, and I've previously only worked with blown glass, but my work's so sort of thick and highly polished. It sort of had a lot of inspiration from cast glass. So one of the main reasons I went to work with Bruno was just to sort of become more proficient with cold working techniques, which you have to be to do cast glass. Obviously, while I was there in his studio, I learned a bit about glass casting, and these are some of the pieces that then came from that time. So this piece, again, is that sort of suspended network of cane through the middle, but I then sliced into the solid bit of glass when it was cold, then put it into a mold and cast it, not to change the shape, but to seal up the cuts, so that then it created these shadows through the piece. So this piece I had to then make the network of cane, create that into a blown piece, then cut the piece, then cast the piece, then recold work the piece. So there's so many stages of process with a lot of my work. You sort of go through various different, you might then pick it up and blow it again after casting it. These are the most popular castings. They're my most favorite. These sort of cuboid forms called tesseract. And we've been making them in the hot shop, Deborah and Huskies, and they've taken all day. They're sort of 7-hour pieces. 9 separate columns of glass that are all sort of put together, and you create a really thick piece of glass, which needs about a month to anneal.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the first one, which was this one, it actually cracked even after annealing all that time, which was quite devastating. And I was at Bruno's at the time, and he suggested that, well, you put so much sort of time, effort, money into it, you should try casting it. If you get it hot enough, then the cracks will all seal, become veils, and hopefully sort of save the piece. He also had quite a lot to say about blowers annealing time not being quite enough, and give me a much more conservative annealing time for this piece. And I'm very grateful to all his sort of advice and knowledge that he was able to give me when I was there. But the unexpected thing was the columns, when done hot, were much more sort of rigid. And once you cast them, you created this flow. It was almost sort of like fabric. And I was just so happy with the outcome in terms of the internal movement of the color, that after that, I just started doing them intentionally. So this is another one of that, where we've cast these 9, so that rather than putting together hot, we took the 9 separate columns of glass, which I made in the hot shop, and then cast them into the mold to create this solid cube. Again, be annealing for sort of over a month for a size of this nature. And again, it is a play of illusion with color, of just using blue, yellow, and pink to create these greens, oranges, and purples. But it was much more of a sort of 3-dimensional painting, these pieces, I felt. And they really do change a lot when they're sort of viewed in person.
How big is that?
So they range from 20 centimeters across, or cubed, to, there's one that is at Collect this year, which is the largest I've done, and it's around 27 centimeters. And they've been ground down as well. So I grind so obviously I grind on a flatbed, which I've got a video doing, to create these sharp surfaces and create the sharp edges, but create the flats. But I'm also taking away a layer of color, so it means it's got a greater translucency, and you can see through to then the other layers. Yeah, so if it ends up at 20 centimeters, I've probably ground about 5 centimeters of glass away.
Golly.
So this is the very big one, which will be at Collect this year. I won't be working at this size again. This is definitely pushing my limits. And yeah, it was annealed for about 6 weeks or so. But you can sort of see a bit more accurately than the sort of those layers of color. From the top, you can sort of see the more individual columns. But yeah, a piece like that weighed nearly 40 kilos, I think, before it was cut apart. So getting it out of the kiln, putting all the 9 columns in individually was okay, but trying to take out the whole thing was, yeah, I won't be doing that again. That definitely pushed what I can do. I mean, people like Colin Reed and Bruno himself, they make these really large pieces, and they've got various apparatus, and David himself, David Ricci, would have cast very large pieces, and I have different cranes and things to take these pieces out. But I do so much cold working hands-on that, yeah, I want to be able to sort of handle the glass really. So this is one that, just to show you, the polishing on a reciprolat, which I used to get that final optical polish. But this is the columns of glass before they're cast. So you can see that they are, sorry. So you can see they're much straighter before they're cast. They don't have that fluidity of movement, which is what really appealed to me with the casting process. This was one that I was trying to push it much further in terms of the movement. It's called dispersion. It's almost just like a flower suspended inside the glass cube. But you can really see that drip sort of fluid motion. The blue at the bottom, I really like the idea of sort of ink being dropped into water. I call it things like static movement. I really think there's still lots of movement within it, even though it's fixed. And I really like the idea of when it's casting in a kiln, the colours moving, and then obviously you take the heat away, and then it's freezing that movement. And there's been a lot of, the first ones I did, I think I got quite lucky, and then trying to replicate it back and get it just right, because half an hour and it could all have dripped too far, or half an hour too less, and it might not have that very interesting movement. So it's been a lot of experimentation to sort of get that right. And so one of the ways that I've achieved this shows you the optical effects of it being, you can see the flat, but then when I really like the edges of the cubes, and you get that doubling up effect. But the way I've achieved the movement is that, like I say, these are blown forms in the hot shot. So the blue color was a bubble of blue, but once it gets hot inside of the kiln, the bubble will close up, and then because the bubble is lighter than the glass, it starts to rise up through the glass, and that's what distorts all the layers and creates the movement of color. That's a detail of one.
Tim, what is the top end then? Is the blue the top?
So the colors themselves are all the same way as with these cups, if they are exactly in the same place.
Right.
So the blue's in the middle, the pink's around it, and the yellow's on top. But due to their different weights as in the weight of the color itself, they layer. So you get blue on the bottom, pink in the middle, and yellow on top. But again, it's just to do with the right heating program. Wow. It's almost a bit like a B-52 shot, if anyone's ever had one of those, where they layer the liquor in sort of three bits, and it's just because of the weights of the liquids that they're able to suspend that way. And the casting process achieves that, which was a happy surprise, and I've just learned how to try and manipulate those principles. I don't think there's been that much experimentation done in terms of crossing over blowing and casting. There've been a few people who've been doing that, or they make solid pieces. But what I'm trying to do is use the air pockets of blowing to manipulate the color when it's cast. And yeah, there's a lot of processes to go through. So when it doesn't go right, it's quite painful, because they take, like I say, if it's just cooling down the kiln for a month, they're quite an investment, these pieces. This is a detail of sort of orange. I just really like, it's just the quality of the color. They've got a really delicate nature, and it's sort of reminds me of, like I say, sort of plant forms and different things like that, but also sort of abstract paintings. I really, yeah, the quality of the color, I just don't think I can achieve in another way. This just show inside of the kiln after they've cast. So you can see this piece here, the glass was at the very top of this mold. So you can see how far down it's sunk with the air that's come out. So that's how I create that much movement. You know, some of them might not as move.
How many hours have you got them in the kiln then for that?
Well, like I say, something that, like these cube pieces, the annealing is a month.
Right.
So the actual
you're holding them at a certain temperature for.
Yeah, so you very slowly heat the glass up, especially because it's a blown glass form, so it's already got the size. It's not necessarily individual billets. So to slowly heat it up or the glass will crack. Once it's reached molten temperature, it will then move and change. And that might, you know, depends on the piece, but that might only be for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Any more than that, and the color will just move too much.
Yeah.
It'll only be a couple of hours, very hot temperature. And then again, so it will drop down to about 500 degrees, which is the annealing temperature for blown glass. It's different with bullseye and it's different with like gaffer cast glass. But yeah, with blown glass, drops down to 500 degrees, and then from 500 down to room temperature for a thick piece will take about a month.
Yeah.
And it's not worth rushing. But yeah, when I spoke to the guy at Glasmer in Sweden about what I was doing in annealing temperatures, he was like, "This glass is for blowing, you know, tableware." He was a little bit perplexed about what I was trying to do with it, but very helpful. This is sort of following on from these cast pieces, the movement, but having way more, rather than a solid piece, using lots of different broken up bits of glass and different frits, create lots of little air bubbles. So you can create far greater movement. And this is that same piece. This is me cutting the piece on the saw. Yeah, I use the clipper saw for nearly everything. If it's a cube, then it's roughly there, so I can just grind the form. Most of the other pieces I do, I'll nearly always take a slice off it. I feel you create a more interesting form, but also you're able to see into the glass, see into the piece. And the working on the saw, for me, that was what really appealed to me when I was at university. First, it was like, what do you mean you can cut glass? It just seemed a crazy thing to be able to do. And then it was more of a sort of childlike thing of wanting to see what's inside of something, sort of cutting it open. Particularly with sort of my echoes pieces of seeing the rings and the layers. Yeah, my sort of most natural sculptural intent is with the saw, and that's sort of where I feel I do. It's sort of the most signature thing to what I do. And this is then another one of these pieces of playing about with the color, but again, just trying to create all that movement with much more bubbles. I really like sort of Hubble telescope imagery and things like that. And it sort of gives me the feeling of these sort of faraway galaxies and things like that. That was the inspiration. These pieces called Tetra was done by casting a much more specific inclusion inside of the glass. So I was going back to working with Kane, but trying to give it more detail. I had my honeymoon in Bali, and we did lots of scuba diving, snorkeling and different dives around there. And the thought of underwater world was just like, I found it very mesmerizing. And these pieces were sort of to tackle that.
Oh, wow.
It's a prismatic effect, but I was sort of trying to get these sort of sea urchin effects and have it sort of look as if they're moving in with the sort of current. And yeah, this pyramidal form then just really beautifully echoed that around, so you're creating this sort of prismatic effect in the glass.
That is gorgeous.
Thank you. These pieces are called Essence, and it's for a solo show I did, my first solo show at London Glass Blowing. And I was trying to sort of replicate some of the movement that I was creating in the cast glass, but these sort of swirls, but try and achieve something similar on the blowpipe. And these are sort of first pieces of looking like that. It'll have that sort of painterly brush quality. So it was, I spent quite a bit of time casting, and I sort of come back to blowing, and I sort of go back and forth, sort of, and sort of what mood I'm in. But the most popular work at the moment has certainly been the blown forms, especially these echoes of light pieces. So I'd always worked with a photographer called Esther Segara, and in lockdown she was in Sweden, and I worked with a photographer called Sylvain Delou, who's based in London, and it's been really enjoying working with him and a new relationship. And we started working with pairs, and he's such a talented photographer. He was capturing what one piece was doing, like how it was reflecting into the other piece. And then that has then made me respond creatively to that and started looking at pairs and things like that. And I do think that the benefit, I say to anyone who's sort of getting work made, of having really high quality professional photographs, because a lot of the time that's all anyone might see of your work, and it might be all you end up left of your work. And I think that working with him and the photography that he did, of really showing off, I felt for the first time, that the optical qualities of my work has definitely helped me to get notoriety in America, and started working with galleries there over the past few years. And these particular works are definitely the most popular over there. So yeah, with him I just started doing photographs of groups and things like that, and it just brought a new dimension to this range, which had already been worked on for quite a period of time. So this particular composition was selected for the British Glass Biennale this year in 2022, and I was delighted that it won the People's Prize for the show. So that was really nice. And yeah, I think the strength of Sylvain's image of being able to capture one piece in the other and really exploit the fact that these are polished glass lenses, I just think he's done that magnificently. And it's funny that very often, I've heard Peter say this before, I know there's sort of Chihuly quotes on it, of sometimes photography of your work will then lead to new work because of what you've seen in the photo of the first piece. It's a bit chicken and egg of sort of what came first. But yeah, I've really found these photos have made me think about my work in a new way, and I've definitely led it to taking it on that way. This is some photography that we did earlier this year, and we're looking at doing some more things. This was using natural light, and very often I sort of sometimes find the projections of color given off by the piece to be almost as exciting as the piece itself, or sometimes maybe the more interesting part. So we're sort of looking at potentially doing something more with that, ideas of a book, but also of printing techniques as well, with this way of capturing the sunlight that's projected through the glass. Wow. And also the shadows that you then have is that are just really lovely. And it's the nicest thing that collectors have sort of said to me of my work, is that they've got it somewhere with natural light, how the shadows progress through the day and how it changes, and how the sort of mood of the piece changes with the time of day. So it's, I think you can clearly see from the work I've shown you, the interaction between light and glass in my work is really what appeals to me. It's really the root of it all. So it's been really good to try, and I don't feel I ever captured it properly with 2D imagery to explain the work. So working with Sylvan has been really good to do that. This is one of these very large scale ones that were for a particular commission, and it's just to show how I cut open these echo forms on the clipper saw. This is a really big one, so it was a bit scary, but generally it's not as scary as it looks. I sort of feel quite confident if you've got the piece in a proper jig and properly supported, and it's just about going slowly. But once you've started a cut, you're bound to that angle, because otherwise, if you're cutting around something, you can't change that angle, otherwise it won't go through correctly, especially when you're trying to create a flat. So yeah, it's certainly a skill that's taken quite a few years to sort of get better at. I never would have dreamed of being able to cut something this big when I started, but it's just like with anything that's a discipline, the more you do, the more hours you build up and gaining that confidence. But yeah, that piece was a bit scary. This is a detail of some new work I've been doing, sort of developed in lockdown. It's called Oculus. So rather than the sort of pure colors of the echoes, of working with frits and powders to create a much more textured palette of color. And it's each color is reacting with each other color. So there's a lot of alchemy with glass color. The way you create colored glasses, you add different metal oxides to clear glass. So if you've got one color which, say, has got a silver metal in it, another color that has a gold metal in it, when they touch, you'll get a reaction which might create 3 or 4 different colors. So these pieces have been about exploiting the alchemy and creating these. So this is a detail of the color of the orb. I really like sort of marbling and things like that, the way people put color together. So these are sort of a take on that. This is a video of just how I then will distort and pull the color about using a metal tool. So that's what creates the movement within the color. So I'll start with the ball of color and distort it in this way, which will then be blown up to something like this. And then that is the full form. So it looks like the orb of color is suspended in midair. It's just a very thick layer of clear glass. And because you've got such a layer of thick glass around it, you get the color refracting in the edge of the clear glass, which I think it's, for me, it's the most beautiful sort of part of these. Also, I've had a lot of Turkish people coming to talk about the evil eye and things like that. And it's been quite interesting reading through the history of art, of how that's sort of the idea of the eye it's had such an important thing. They see it as sort of a good luck charm, or at least a good luck for the house to have one inside. There's an oval version of this behind the round one, and this is a pair that will be at Collect at Somerset House at the start of March. And again, it's just working with these different, I think probably inspiration from the cast glass moving into the blown glass, and sort of trying to create this fluidity and movement within the color rather than it being static. And there's definitely this sort of idea of this eye that looks back at you. You can certainly see that. There's another variation on that called mosaic. So the exterior of the clear glass, when it's hot, has been chilled with cold water. So that's what's created these cracks all around it. So I sort of think of it as mosaic, is what it looks like. Different mosaics I saw when I was in Italy. And it's another variation on these new pieces. This is another piece that will be at Collect. So if anyone doesn't know, who keeps talking about Collect, Collect is a craft art show, which is at Somerset House. It was at Saatchi Gallery for quite a few years, and then the V&A before that. It's generally sort of one of the top arts and crafts shows that you have each year. It's only on for a week, and I'll be showing with London Glass Blowing at start of March at Somerset House. And this is a new sort of form I've been working on, where it's a sort of, rather than the smooth exterior, it's got a very twisted exterior. And it just, the way that the glass, the color refracts within those distortions is really interesting. So this is it before it's been cut. So I can sort of cut parallelogram shape, but that's the full, you can see that full twist around the exterior. So it's done by making sort of quite a square shape and then using the heat just to allow that to twist upon itself. So that's sort of the main body of work that I've done for myself. I've set a few slides to show sort of commission work that I do, which is really interesting, something that I wouldn't have necessarily decided to do. So in this particular one, it was a mirror, which is for a guy, it's in Florence in Italy. And I was quite surprised he'd come to London to an English glassmaker, and there's some sort of Italian variations on that. This is a really large mirror, and it's individual cut bits of glass that I've done with cane work that are then UV glued to the mirror. This project went on for a couple of years. It took quite a long time to create all these different pieces and polish them up till he selected the ones he wanted, and then laminated in this orientation. This is a tabletop I did for a client who came with the brass legs and top and wanted me to make the glass to go in the middle, again using cane work. And it's not anything that I would have decided to do, but it was such an interesting challenge to be to sort of respond to, and it's a really fun way of approaching new ideas by being sort of given a brief that you wouldn't have necessarily done for yourself. And last one, which I really enjoy, is a collaboration with a rug designer in London called Sonia Winner. And she turned my Echoes of Light design into one of her rugs, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, I believe that's, this was one other commission, which is a client, he asked me to create the shape as a hyperbolic paraboloid, which is also what a Pringle is. But this is suspended within clear glass inside this sphere, and there's a skin of purple color around it, which I've ground these windows through to see to it. And this was a really big challenge. This was very difficult. I made this with James Deborah, and he did not thank me for coming up with this design. But what was really nice is this form of a sphere with these separate windows, which there's an Escher painting a drawing called Otherworld, which sort of has that idea of looking through into these 6 windows. And I've made a lot of new work now based upon that, which again will be at Collect this year. I hope you enjoyed the sort of overview of my career and sort of what work it is that I do. As I sort of said earlier, it's become, past few years, I've opened up as sort of an American market, and that's proved, it's been very successful at the moment. So it's very good. It's sort of, it is a sort of small world in the glass scene, but then suddenly when you start sort of growing overseas, you suddenly see how different it is in different countries and the passion for that people have. It's it's been great to sort of really grow in that way.
Fantastic.
Thank you. That is wonderful. Really.
Thank you to Pam and Sue for asking me to do this. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Oh, I did mean to show you when I was casting, looking at the castings. This is sort of one that is a smaller one. I don't know how easy it is to see, but again, it's that idea of these sort of network of canes within a polished piece. I don't know how well that comes across.
We can't really.
Yeah, it's better.
There in the
Yeah.
camera.
Yeah, that's better. Wow. Oh,
You want to stop sharing, Tim? We might be able to see it better.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're,
Oh, I see. I
that's
see.
your last slide.
That is my last slide.
We might see. We might see the piece easier.
actually, if we go on to,
If we go to speaker view and then you show us, we can
Yeah.
all see it.
yeah, talk to us, Tim, and you should come on to speaker view then.
Hello.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's it.
All right.
So you can sort of see the optical effect of how it springs into the, again, it's the idea of this sort of network of canes that run through the glass, but just using the clear glass to really show off the form.
Yeah.
That sort of diamond parallelogram shape.
It's amazing, isn't it? That optical illusion. Of
Yeah, that is brilliant.
something in the center, but goes right to the edge.
Yeah, good. Fantastic. I'm going to ask you something which is probably going to sound really thick, but as I'm not a blower, I'm going to use that as my excuse. You know, when you certainly it's the first work, and you've got these amazing sort of square, cubes, which are blown and you then cast.
Mm.
Do you blow them into a mold to get the squareness, or do you take the round and then basically cut and grind it into the square?
So the 9 individual columns,
Yeah,
we've got like cork paddles that you can create flats on the glass.
yeah,
So I'll roughly square up 9 columns, which
Yeah.
are sort of rectangle shapes, but they're not sharp, they're sort of rounded corners.
Yeah, yeah.
These then go into a square mold, but it's much taller because it's obviously going to sink down.
Yeah.
So it's the casting element that creates the sharpness,
Right.
but it also then needs to be ground on the flatbed to create that really crisp edges.
Yeah.
And just get the geometry right as well.
Yeah. And so,
So
what,
you're actually blowing, you're actually blowing 9 columns. There's
Yeah.
9 separate pieces that are then put together in the mold.
Yeah, so there's 4 clear columns, 1 blue, 2 pink, 2 yellow.
Ah, right. Yeah.
and after
That's-
when you've then done that, and then you put it in to cast it again to get the movement,
Mhm.
do you then have to cold work it again?
Yeah, once it comes out of the kiln, it has to be cold worked.
Right.
That's
got
the
it.
major cold working, isn't it? Once it comes out.
Yeah,
the
the
mold.
cold working takes the most amount of time.
Yeah.
Like the hot shop is quite an instant process. A long piece might take a few hours, but you can't walk away. You're bound to finish what you've started. So a few hours in the hot shop, a large piece, is still quite an endurance thing. But the cold work is the much more laborious one. But you can be way more analytical with it. You can sort of take time over certain things or change what you're doing. Except once you've cut bits off, they're generally gone.
You can't glue them back.
That's an Anthony Scala project. That's not my.
Brilliant.
Oh, wow. Golly.
I mean, it's great because you're really experimenting and doing something that nobody else is doing, and it's really interesting to see that evolving through your work.
No, thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Golly. I'm
Has
quite,
anybody got any questions there? I'm sure must be some questions for
Yeah.
Tim.
I'm quite gobsmacked. I have to be honest, it's so amazing.
Have we got lots in the chat? Nine in the chat. What?
I think it's mainly lovely comments.
Oh yeah, they're all wowed by you and your work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this talk. I was also going to mention the casting, like I say, it takes a long time, a lot of testing. So I've got a solo show at London Glassblowing in the start of October. So I'm doing some new castings specifically for that. There will be a large cast piece at Collect, not one of these cubes, the Tesseract pieces, but some developments of the ribbons of cane that I've cast within it. So yeah, I'm holding that sort of body of work for the solo show at London Glassblowing in October. So if anyone,
I was
Yeah.
going to say to you, because you keep saying you're making this for this and that. I mean, it must be quite time consuming each piece. So how many pieces?
yeah,
How many pieces would you make in a year? Quite
I made quite a lot last year. It's been my most busy year for sure.
You must be working very hard.
The casting is, you because of that time sensitive nature, that not as many make, and not all of them go right. It's quite an experimental thing. It depends. The blown work, and Echoes of Light. I'll spend a day making cups. I'll then spend a day putting them together, making the forms with James. Might do maybe like a good day, we could do 4 in a day, so 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. And then each piece would take a couple of weeks to finish in cold work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know roughly a number, but it takes quite a while for each of the processes.
And presumably with all of them, although I suspect you know what you're aiming at, there must be an element of, I've gone really funny. There must be an element of surprise, and things must happen that you're not totally expecting, presumably, because it is quite experimental, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely with the casting, that's the case. But I think that's the nature of glass, it's so process driven that, like Peter Layton, he always refers to sort of sketching on the blowing iron, and especially with the sort of reactive color pieces that I did with the Oculus at the eyeball. There's definitely a case of the process having a large element in that creative design of just that's done that, and how that then will lead to sort of thought process. But yeah, the first castings, when I saw the first one that came out and it had layered the colors at different levels, I totally wasn't expecting that. It was just and then spent a long time trying to re-achieve it, and actually you might get something that's a happy accident and you really like it. You spend then a lot of time trying to make it a purposeful one.
And do you find that there are certain ranges and certain pieces which are more popular in some countries than in others? I mean, do you find that there is a definite sort of, I don't know, does the American market, do you have pieces which appeal much more to them than to other markets? Or do you tend to find that everyone likes everything? If they've got any taste, they'll all like everything because it's beautiful. But it's been just, interesting whether there's sort of national sort of characteristics in a way.
The Echoes of Light range is my most popular all over, but particularly in America, that's been the sort of body of work that has gotten interest over there. So I'm also showing Habitat Glass Galleries in Detroit. So it's the first time I've been invited to their international invitational, which is in May, and it's coinciding with the Gas Glass conference over there. And I think it's funny, sort of America is definitely, they've got so many more resources, it's a bigger industry and there's a lot more money involved, but they were really struck with how clean our glass was. It's sort of the sort of optical clarity of the glass, my pieces, they said that they don't quite have that with their glass there, which I found quite interesting. It's also quite a sort of Czech style, I think, my work, of sort of these thick pieces and cut and polished. That's something that they that they're masters of. So I think the more angular pieces in sort of the Eastern Europe market is certainly more Central Europe. That sort of work I think appeals to that tradition more. And in America, they just want it bigger as well. The size of the work they can make over there is just incredible. It really is.
And so how do you see things going over the next couple of years?
I work quite far ahead due to the length of time that these pieces take. So I'll work sort of 6 months to a year ahead.
Right.
So like I say, I'm working at the moment so like all the collect work is finished, and most of the work for Habitat is finished, and show I'm doing in Florida, the Duncan McClellan Gallery. So I'm currently working mostly for that, to the solo show, which is at the end of the year. And I generally work at least for 6 months ahead, just because how long the work takes to make. So I'm sort of always ahead, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow, golly.
But one of the new things I sort of want to work on is I'm creating the Echoes pieces. They're freestanding. I'm doing sort of variations on that are going to become wall pieces, which has got various technical difficulties, but yeah, that's sort of what I've been developing at the moment.
Really? Wow.
I think Judy, have you got a question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, is when you make the crackle glass, do you have, and because I love that, but it's do you have to reheat it to seal up the outside, or it just crackles, and how do you know it's not going to fall off?
It's so thick that it won't crack all the way through.
Right.
It's just the surface that's cracking, but there's still like might be a centimeter deep. With some of them, I crack it and then reheat it enough that the piece is safe. But I've left all those cracks within the surface, and then I cut through the piece so you can see through to it, and it looks a lot like ice does. Sort of. So it's a really interesting. It's coming quite up. It's reasonably new with my work. I did it for a Venetian show at London Glass Blow, and that was the technique I sort of was exploring. But I've been doing it where you crack the surface and then you start to blow the piece up so the cracks actually open. So it becomes much more like carving on the outside of the glass rather than just the cracks. So there's a lot you could work with that. I know Billy Morris in the 80s did stuff where he would crack the color and then spread it open. So there's a lot of scope to play with that technique. I'm enjoying sort of where it might go.
So when you crack it while after you've blown it and it's still hot, you crack it and then you reheat it.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, thank you.
But it depends how the reheating depends how much you want to maintain the cracks.
Yes.
If you do it too much, it becomes too subtle. So it's a very fine line.
Yes. Thank you.
Could you crack it and then gather over it?
You can, but it's quite messy. You sort of trap a lot of air bubbles. So the cracking becomes much more sort of bubble texture. It's an interesting thing in itself, but it's not quite what I'm wanting it more on the surface for the optical quality.
Yeah. I was
Once
I was just curious because it is an interesting. I was just trying to sound like a blower then, you see. Rather than works with fused glass.
Somebody was asking, are you tempted to go in for Blown Away?
My good friend Elliot was the winner. Well, no spoilers. He was on Blown Away too.
Yeah.
And I know from first hand what that experience was like. And I don't think that's quite for me. And it's so instantaneous, that show. It's such a clever show. It's like it's so quick what they do. Yeah. And Elliot's talents were just perfect for that show. With me, it'd be like, okay, well, I'll be 5 months on this first task. I don't think quite ally itself to an interesting TV show, I think.
Brilliant.
And the cold working process in that show, they don't show it at all. It's very much about the blown thing, whereas a lot of my work
lot of
is about,
editing.
yeah. But it's about creating a blown piece that doesn't have a lot of finishing done to it, which is obviously what most of my work's about. So I don't really think the way I work allies itself to a show like that. But it's amazing the exposure it's given to the glass industry.
Yeah.
And for Elliot, the way it's exploded his career has been fantastic.
Yeah.
Sarah's asked, the textured watery side of the cast pieces, is that from the mold or all in the cold work or a bit of both?
So do you mean the inside colour?
Oh no, I think it's the piece where it looks, the reflection
it's like
is very watery. You said it was like looking through water at the sun. The blue piece.
Oh, yeah, so that's a dappled texture. So rather than cracking, the surface of the glass is just chilled. So it creates a dappled texture on the glass. So rather than then having that clean reflection in it, it's all broken up.
Oh, right. And Sharon, whoops, hang on, wrong one. Sharon has just asked, the big saw that you use, what is the thickness of glass that it can cut?
Anything that will fit through the gap, basically. You just have to, you can't do something all at once because it's sort of, it's like a break. So you'd start with a certain depth and then get deeper and deeper. If you try to go a full depth at once, it's like applying a brake to a wheel. It just, there's too much friction. And the biggest problem with cutting is keeping the glass wet and cold, because you've got a spinning piece of metal, so obviously it can get exceedingly hot. So sometimes you see sort of red flares and sparks. If that happens, the glass will crack. So you've got to just be, the thickness of glass, you can cut whatever thickness, but you've just got to do it incrementally. Take your time.
Can you use the piece you cut off? Do you get a second piece?
Sometimes I do. I'm doing some bits with the offcuts and then using for castings. Sometimes it won't survive the process. Sometimes it's an opportunity to cut away a bit I don't like, whether it's a piece of ash or a bubble or something like that. So the cutting process sort of gives me that chance to be analytical with the blank of glass. So very often the bit I cut will be, I'll want to remove that bit. That makes sense.
Yeah, interesting.
Sharon is asking again about cutting. Do you have to rotate the glass to cut through it?
No, you keep the glass still, because if there's too much movement, again, the vibration cores could crack the glass. So you're keeping it still, but then you would rotate. So you go through with one cut, come out, then rotate the glass and go through. So you can go all the way around.
Ah, right. Okay. And Judith asked, can you add oxide to the cracks where you've crackled it?
Yeah, there's. Is that here? No, I think I've been working on pouring coloured powder into the cracks, so that you get a sort of network of coloured lines in the cracks. So yeah, you can do that. You can also do. There's different sort of. I don't know what you call it. Sort of like when you're buffing something, you can put different like metal buffs, polishes. So you can do that. It's almost essentially painting into the glass. So you can do that as well. You would coat the whole glass when it's hot.
Yeah.
And it's gone into the cracks. You then wipe off all the colour, and the colour's only left in the cracks.
Yeah.
That's how you sort of play with that.
Yeah. That sounds great. Golly. I want to take up hot glass blowing. Pam, stop me. Don't let me do it.
She's like my daughter, wants to do everything. Oh, that's great though, Tim. It's really
Oh, yeah.
interesting to see all the techniques.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that has been so fantastic. And your solo show, when it comes up to it, please send us information so we can publicize it. Because seriously, anything you've got coming up that you think would be of interest to us, let us know, because we'll put it up I'll put it into the newsletter, we'll put it up onto the website and everything, so everybody knows about it all.
I'm sure lots of us are coming to collect as well, so we'll be seeing it in real life.
Yeah. Linda?
Yeah, can I just ask one last question?
Yeah,
actually for your dad, Tim. I'm looking at what's behind you, and is it wood? Is it laminated wood? Or
so he got that at Collect a few years ago.
Yeah, is it? Because it's just like Tapio Verculas wood.
It's a solid piece of wood that we got to collect. It's been by a Bulgarian woodcutter, so it's not made. It was a solid piece.
Right, so it's just been cut. Angles. It's not laminated and then cut.
No, nothing at all.
Oh, okay,
solid
yeah.
Piece.
Yeah. Now there was a glassmaker here who also made beautiful sculpture work with laminated wood cut. It just looks just like that. I just had to ask. Sorry.
You look beautiful. I thought it was your rah-rah skirt hanging up there when I saw it behind you, I have to be honest. But I didn't. I was too polite to ask.
No, well, I don't want to be distracting or anything, but it's one of the reasons to go to Collect, because there's so much there. All the woodwork and ceramics and jewelry and of course the wonderful glass.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've only been once. I really enjoyed it, but the security followed me around. I thought it might have been the nose ring.
Well, we understand that, Linda. Knowing you, we understand that. Brilliant. Oh golly, that has been absolutely wonderful, Tim. Thank you so much.
It's been great.
It's been really, really amazing.
You're very welcome.
I think you've inspired all of us to actually relook at our work, whatever technique we use. That's one of the joys actually of these kind of talks, is that you look at other people's work and you see it in sort of, in sort of depth, and it makes you stand back and think about what you're doing, and actually fact whether you can take some of those influences and what you've learned from other people into it. And that's really, I think, the joy of working in the glass community, is that we all have this ability to share, which is lovely. But yeah, fantastic. Your work is inspirational. It's absolutely magical. It's lovely. Thank you.